The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, cutting through the humid Afghan night like a blade through silk. Static washed over the emergency frequency before a voice emerged, calm, almost conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than requesting immediate close air support for a SEAL team pinned down in the Korangal Valley. Any station, this is Trident 6. We have troops in contact, danger close, grid November Delta 478921. Multiple KIA, running low on ammo. Request immediate CAS, over. The transmission hung in the darkness like smoke. At forward operating base shank, controllers exchanged glances across their blue-lit screens. The Korangal wasn't just any valley. It was the Valley of Death, where coalition forces had been bleeding for years against an enemy that knew every ridge, every cave, every shadow. The grid coordinates placed Trident 6 in a box canyon with 300-foot walls on either side. Terrain so unforgiving that even Apache gunships struggled to provide effective support. Captain Marlowe, Viper Kessler, adjusted her night vision goggles and studied the tactical display from her position in the ready room. The green glow illuminated a face that had seen too much for someone barely 30 years old. High cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a scar running from her left temple to her jaw, a souvenir from her first tour in Iraq. She'd been here before, in this exact moment where everything balanced on the edge of a knife. The other pilots whispered behind her back, calling her Ice Queen or worse. They saw a woman who'd clawed her way into the cockpit of an A-10 Thunderbolt II through pure stubborn will, someone who'd survived 3 combat tours not through luck, but through an almost supernatural ability to read the battlefield like sheet music. What they didn't see was the weight she carried, the faces that visited her dreams, the radio calls that echoed in the spaces between heartbeats. The mission controller's voice crackled over the intercom. All stations, weather is 00 with heavy fog in target area, minimum ceiling 300 feet. All fixed-wing assets stand down until conditions improve. But Trident 6 didn't have time for weather to improve. In the Valley of Death, time was measured in heartbeats and ammunition counts, and both were running out fast. Major Henderson, the squadron commander, stood at the tactical display, his weathered face grim in the monitor's glow. 23 years of service had taught him when to follow rules, and when rules would get good people killed. The fog in the Korangal was thick enough to swallow aircraft whole. Instrument flight rules would be suicide in terrain that reached up like fingers to tear planes from the sky. "Sir," Viper said quietly, stepping forward, "I can get in there." Henderson didn't look up from the screen. "Weather's below minimums, Captain. Even if you could punch through, you'd be flying blind in a box canyon with friendlies and hostiles mixed together like alphabet soup." The radio crackled again. "Any station, this is Trident 6. We're down to our last magazine. If someone doesn't get here soon, you'll need to send body bags instead of bullets, over." The voice belonged to Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, a legend among the teams, a man who'd earned 3 Navy Crosses and survived more firefights than most people could count. If Webb was calling for help, the situation had moved past desperate into the realm of the impossible. Viper's hand moved unconsciously to the small silver cross hanging beneath her flight suit, a gift from her younger brother before his own deployment to Helmand Province, before the IED that had sent him home in a flag-draped coffin, before she'd traded her grief for the cold fury that made her the most feared close air support pilot in theater. "I can thread that needle, sir," she repeated, her voice steady as a sniper's breathing. "The A-10 was built for this kind of work, low and slow under the weather. Give me a chance." Henderson finally looked at her, seeing not the woman who'd been passed over for promotion twice or the pilot who'd filed more incident reports than anyone else in the squadron. He saw the kind of warrior that emerged from the crucible of modern warfare, scarred, relentless, and utterly without fear. The tactical display showed Trident 6's position like a red wound in the digital landscape. 6 Navy SEALs, the most elite warriors America could produce, trapped in terrain so hostile it had earned its nickname in blood. The enemy had them surrounded, and morning would bring helicopters full of reinforcements that would turn a firefight into a massacre. "Weather minimums exist for a reason, Viper," Henderson said, but his voice carried the weight of a man wrestling with impossible choices. "That fog is thicker than concrete. You go in there and we might lose you and the SEALs." "With respect, sir," Viper replied, "we're going to lose them anyway if someone doesn't act. The A-10 can handle weather that would kill other aircraft, and I know that valley better than anyone." It was true. Over 3 combat tours, she'd flown more missions into the Korangal than any other pilot. She knew every ridgeline, every compound, every place where muzzle flashes bloomed like deadly flowers in the darkness. The valley had tried to kill her 17 times, and 17 times she'd emerged victorious, her aircraft trailing smoke but still flying. The radio provided its own punctuation, Trident 6 to any station, taking heavy fire from multiple positions. "We've got wounded that need immediate medevac. How copy, over?" Webb's voice remained steady, professional, but Viper could hear the subtle changes, the slight acceleration of speech that meant adrenaline was flooding his system, the tiny pause before "wounded" that suggested the casualties were worse than he wanted to admit. She'd heard the same tone in her own voice during her worst moments, when survival became a matter of willpower rather than tactics. Henderson stared at the weather display, watching the storm system crawl across Afghanistan like a living thing. The fog would persist for hours, maybe longer. By the time it cleared, Trident 6 would be nothing but a grid reference for a recovery mission. "Sir," the mission controller interjected, "we're getting reports of vehicle movement on the ridgelines around Trident 6's position. Looks like the enemy is massing for a final assault. If they're going to make a move, it'll be soon." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In the digital age of warfare, with satellites and drones providing real-time intelligence, there were few secrets left on the battlefield. If enemy fighters were moving vehicles into position, it meant they felt confident enough in their numbers to risk exposure. That confidence came from knowing their prey was trapped and helpless. Viper checked her watch. 4:12 hours. Dawn was still 3 hours away, but in the Korangal Valley, dawn might as well have been next century. Time had become an enemy, each passing minute bringing Trident 6 closer to a fight they couldn't win. "I'm going," she said simply, turning toward the door. "Captain Kessler," Henderson's voice carried the weight of command, stopping her mid-stride. "Stand down, that's an order." She turned back, and in that moment, every person in the Tactical Operations Center saw something that would haunt their memories for years to come. It wasn't anger or insubordination. It was the look of someone who'd already made peace with death and found it wanting. "Sir," she said quietly, "with all due respect, there are 6 Americans dying in that valley. They signed up to fight America's enemies, not to be abandoned by their own country because the weather isn't cooperating. I've been shot down twice and walked away both times. I've put ordnance on target in conditions that would ground commercial aircraft. And I've never, not once, left a fellow warrior behind." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the persistent hum of electronics and the distant sound of helicopters on patrol. Every person present understood they were witnessing something rare and dangerous. The moment when training, duty, and personal conviction crystallized into action that would define careers and lives. Henderson looked at his watch, then at the weather display, then at the woman standing before him with the quiet confidence of someone who'd already seen the worst the world could offer and survived it. In another time, another war, the decision would have been easier. But this was Afghanistan, where good options were as rare as clear skies, and every choice carried the weight of consequence. Outside, the fog rolled across Bagram Airfield like a living thing, swallowing aircraft and buildings in its gray embrace. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, designated as Warthog 17, sat on the tarmac, its twin engines cold and quiet. Built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, the aircraft looked more like a flying tank than a traditional fighter. Thick armor plating, redundant systems, and the kind of brutal functionality that prioritized survival over elegance. Viper had flown that particular aircraft on 43 combat missions, each one logged in the maintenance records like chapters in a book written in ordnance and aviation fuel. The ground crew chief, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, called it Marlowe's chariot, a machine so intimately connected to its pilot that it seemed to anticipate her commands. The radio crackled again, Webb's voice cutting through the tactical operations center like a prayer spoken in a dead language. Any station, Trident 6, we're about to be overrun. If anyone's coming, now would be good, over. No emotion, no desperation, just the flat statement of a professional warrior acknowledging the mathematics of modern combat. 6 SEALs with limited ammunition facing unknown numbers in terrain that favored the defense. The equation was simple and brutally honest. Henderson closed his eyes for a long moment, weighing regulations against lives, career against conscience. When he opened them again, he was looking at a woman who represented everything both wrong and right about modern warfare, the kind of warrior who emerged from the crucible of endless conflict, tempered by loss and sharpened by purpose. "Maintenance status on Warthog 17, he asked quietly. The maintenance officer checked his board. "Fully mission capable, sir. Loaded with mixed ordnance, he and practice rounds for the GAU-8, plus a full complement of Hydra rockets. Fuel state shows 97%. Weather in the target area. Zero ceiling, visibility less than 50 meters, winds gusting to 20 knots from the southeast." Henderson nodded slowly, understanding that he was about to make a decision that would either save 6 lives or end 7. In the calculus of command, some mathematics were too terrible to solve with certainty. "Captain Kessler," he said formally, "you are cleared to attempt rescue operations for Trident 6, with the understanding that you are operating outside normal weather parameters and in extreme danger. Do you understand the risks?" Viper's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Sir, I've been flying in extreme danger since my first combat tour. Today's just another day at the office." She turned and headed for the door, each step carrying the weight of 3 combat tour, 43 successful missions, and the memory of a little brother who'd believed his sister could do anything. Behind her, the Tactical Operations Center fell silent except for the persistent electronic hum and the sound of someone whispering a prayer. In 12 minutes, Captain Marlowe, Viper, Kessler would climb into the cockpit of an aircraft designed to survive the worst that modern warfare could offer, and she would disappear into fog so thick it seemed solid, chasing the voice of warriors who'd already given up hope. What happened next would become legend, the kind of story told in ready rooms and briefing halls for generations, a reminder that sometimes the impossible was just another word for Tuesday. But first, she had to reach her aircraft, and even that simple act would prove more complicated than anyone could imagine. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was already conducting the pre-flight inspection when Viper reached Warthog 17, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog like a lighthouse beacon. 22 years of maintaining combat aircraft had given him an almost supernatural ability to diagnose problems before they became fatal, and his approval was worth more than any officer's signature. "She's ready to dance, Captain," Rodriguez said, patting the aircraft's nose like a favored warhorse. "Full fuel, full ordnance, and I personally checked every system twice. The GAU-8 is locked and loaded with 1,350 rounds of mixed ammunition, armor-piercing and high explosive. Should be enough to ruin someone's day." The A-10's cannon was legendary, a 7-barrel rotary weapon that could fire depleted uranium rounds through tank armor like tissue paper. In close air support missions, It was the difference between hope and despair, the sound of salvation delivered at 4,200 rounds per minute. Viper ran her own inspection, her hands moving across control surfaces and weapons pylons with the practiced efficiency of someone whose life depended on mechanical perfection. The fog swirled around her like something alive, reducing the world to a small sphere of visibility that made the aircraft seem isolated in space and time. "Weather's not getting any better," Rodriguez observed, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd watched too many good pilots disappear into hostile skis. "You sure about this, ma'am?" "I'm sure about 6 Navy SEALs who are counting on someone to show up," Viper replied, completing her walk-around inspection. "Everything else is just details." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the mathematics of military service, the unspoken covenant between warriors that transcended rank, branch, or personal safety. He'd been watching pilots fly into impossible situations for over 2 decades, and he'd learned to recognize the ones who would come home and the ones who wouldn't. Captain Kessler belonged to a third category, pilots who would come home, but only after accomplishing something that would echo through history. The climb into the cockpit was routine, muscle memory developed over hundreds of flights, thousands of hours in the air, countless moments when preparation met opportunity in the crucible of combat aviation. The A-10's cockpit was designed around functionality rather than comfort, every switch and display positioned for maximum efficiency in the heat of battle. Viper strapped herself in with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation, each buckle and connection a link in the chain that would keep her alive at 500 feet above hostile terrain. The aircraft felt familiar around her, not just a machine, but an extension of her will, a tool crafted for the specific purpose of delivering precise violence in support of ground forces. "Tower, Warthog 17, requesting immediate departure, emergency mission," she said into her radio, her voice carrying across the fog-shrouded airfield like a challenge to the elements themselves. "Warthog 17, Tower. Current weather is below departure minimums. Recommend you hold until conditions improve." "Tower, Warthog 17. I have American troops in contact requiring immediate support. Request permission to depart under emergency authority." The pause that followed lasted an eternity, filled with the weight of regulations written in the blood of pilots who'd pushed too hard, too fast, too far. But somewhere in that fog-wrapped valley, 6 warriors were counting on someone to remember that rules served soldiers, not the other way around. "Warthog 17, Tower. You are cleared for immediate departure. Emergency authority granted. Winds are calm, visibility 0, ceiling indefinite. Good luck, Captain." The A-10's twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engine spooled up with the deep, throaty growl that had become her favorite sound in the world. The mechanical expression of controlled violence, raw power waiting to be unleashed in service of a righteous cause. The aircraft shuddered slightly as full power engaged, eager to slip its earthbound bonds and claim the hostile sky. Rodriguez stepped back and rendered a perfect salute, his weathered face grim in the aircraft's navigation lights. He'd watched her take off 43 times before, but this felt different, more final, like watching someone walk into a thunderstorm armed with nothing but determination and a profound understanding of duty. Viper returned the salute and released the brakes, feeling the A-10 surge forward into the fog like a hunting animal scenting prey. The runway lights disappeared almost immediately, swallowed by the gray wall that reduced her world to instrument readings and the green glow of her heads-up display. At 90 knots, she pulled back on the stick and felt the aircraft respond with the deliberate precision of a machine built for war. The fog closed around her like a fist, transforming flight into an act of faith. Faith in her instruments, faith in her training, and faith in the voice that had called for help from the valley of death. Climbing through 500 feet, Warthog 17 disappeared completely, becoming nothing more than a radar signature and the memory of turbine noise fading into the Afghan night. But in that climbing aircraft, Viper was already plotting the navigation points that would take her to a grid reference where impossible odds waited to test everything she'd learned about courage, skill, and the price of keeping promises made to fellow warriors. Below and behind her, the fog settled over Bagram Airfield like a burial shroud, hiding the evidence of her departure from a world that would spend the next hour learning whether Captain Marlowe, Viper Kessler, would become a cautionary tale or a legend. The first waypoint was 37 nautical miles from departure, a GPS coordinate that would take her over terrain already legendary for its hostility to aircraft and aircrew. From there, she would begin her descent into the Korangal Valley, following a flight path that existed only in her memory and the desperate hope of 6 warriors who'd run out of options. The flight computer showed an estimated time en route of 18 minutes, 18 minutes to cover ground that had claimed more coalition aircraft than any other piece of real estate in Afghanistan. But time was a luxury Trident 6 didn't possess, and Viper had learned long ago that some promises were worth any risk. At 8,000 feet, she broke through the fog layer into clear air brilliant with stars, the Hindu Kush mountains spreading below her like a frozen ocean. The sight was breathtaking and terrible, beauty that had witnessed countless generations of warfare, terrain that had broken armies and buried empires. Somewhere in that wilderness, 6 of America's finest warriors were fighting for their lives against odds that would have challenged gods. In 17 minutes, those odds were about to change dramatically. The radio crackled, Trident 6 to any station. We're down to our last magazine. Whatever's coming needs to hurry. Webb's voice carried new undertones now, not fear, but the calm acceptance of a professional who understood that some fights couldn't be won through tactics or training. It was the voice of someone preparing to make their last stand count, to sell their lives as expensively as possible. Trident 6, this is Warthog 17, Viper replied, her voice cutting through the static like salvation itself. I'm inbound your position, ETA 15 minutes. Can you mark your position with IR strobes? The silence that followed felt infinite, as if the entire theater of operations had paused to listen. Then Webb's voice returned, carrying something that hadn't been there before, hope. Warthog 17, Trident 6. Negative on IR strobes. We're trying to stay invisible down here, but we've got thermal tape on our helmets and a red smoke canister for when you're overhead. Can you work with that? Roger, Trident 6, I'll find you. What's the tactical situation? We've got hostile forces on 3 sides, approximately 40 to 50 personnel with small arms and at least 2 crew-served weapons. They've got us pinned in a compound about 50 meters from a dry riverbed. We need you to clear the ridgeline to our north. That's where their heavy weapons are positioned. Viper studied her tactical display, overlaying Webb's description with the terrain features she'd memorized over dozens of missions. The compound he described was a stone building that had served as shelter for generations of Afghan fighters. Thick walls, multiple firing positions, and clear fields of fire in all directions. It was the kind of position that could be held indefinitely by determined defenders, or become a tomb for the overconfident. Copy, Trident 6. I show your position in a box canyon with limited egress routes. How did you end up there? Long story, Warthog. Short version is our extraction got waved off due to weather, and we took contact while moving to an alternate landing zone. Been here about 3 hours now, and the neighborhood's getting crowded. 3 hours. Viper understood immediately. 3 hours of constant combat meant ammunition was critically low, wounds were accumulating, and fatigue was becoming a factor. Even Navy SEALs had limits, and Trident 6 was approaching theirs with mathematical precision. What's your ammunition status? Each man has less than 1 magazine for his primary weapon. Sidearms are fuller but not by much. We've got grenades and one A-4, but we're saving those for when things get really interesting. The calm professionalism in Webb's voice was remarkable, discussing ammunition shortages and impending doom as if reviewing a training exercise. It was the hallmark of elite units, the ability to maintain clarity and purpose even when facing certain death. Viper checked her own armament display. The GAU-8 cannon was loaded and ready, the Hydra rocket pods were armed, and all systems showed green. She carried enough ordnance to level a city block, but in close air support missions, precision mattered more than raw firepower. The difference between success and tragedy was often measured in meters rather than miles. Trident 6, I need you to describe the target area in detail. Friendly positions, hostile positions, any obstacles or hazards I need to know about. Roger Warthog. We're in a compound approximately 30 meters by 40 meters, stone construction with a courtyard in the center. North wall faces the ridgeline where the hostiles have their heavy weapons. I'd estimate 200 meters from our position to their muzzle flashes. East and west sides are taking small arms fire from scattered positions, probably squad-sized elements. South side is our only clear avenue, but that's a sheer drop into the riverbed. Webb's tactical description was precise and complete, the product of training that emphasized clarity under pressure. But Viper could hear the subtext. They were surrounded, outgunned, and running out of time. The compound that sheltered them was also their prison, with walls that would become their tomb if she couldn't shift the odds in their favor. Any civilians in the area? Negative, Warthog. This whole valley emptied out when the shooting started. Everything you see moving is either us or them, and we'll mark ourselves when you're inbound. The statement carried weight beyond its tactical significance. No civilians meant weapons free, the authorization to engage any target that presented itself. It was the kind of clarity that close air support pilots dreamed about, removing the complex calculations that usually governed engagement decisions. Viper checked her navigation display. 8 minutes to target. Below her, the Afghan landscape rolled past in shades of gray and black, a moonscape punctuated by the occasional valley that hid villages, compounds, and the dreams of people who'd known nothing but war for generations. The radio provided its own soundtrack to her approach. Trident 6 to Warthog 17. We've got movement on the ridgeline. Looks like they're massing for a final assault. Hope you're close. 5 minutes out, Trident 6. I'm going to make one pass to identify targets, then I'll be back with the GAU-8. When you hear my engines, pop that smoke and keep your heads down. Roger, Warthog. We'll be the ones not shooting at you. Webb's attempt at humor fell flat in the Tactical Operations Center, where every person was listening to the radio chatter with the intensity of mourners at a funeral. Major Henderson stood motionless before the tactical display, watching the slow progression of icons that represented more than aircraft and personnel. They represented the distance between life and death, measured in minutes and miles. The weather officer approached quietly. Sir, latest satellite imagery shows the fog in the Coringal is actually getting thicker. Visibility is down to less than 30 meters in some areas. Henderson nodded without speaking. He'd sent one of his pilots into conditions that would challenge instrument flight in commercial airspace, and she was about to attempt close air support in terrain that had killed more experienced aviators than he cared to remember. The mathematics of the situation were simple and terrible. Success would save 7 lives. Failure would claim them all. 2 minutes, Trident 6. Viper's voice crackled over the radio, steady as stone despite the impossible conditions she was navigating. I'm beginning my descent into the valley now. Visibility is near zero, so I'll be relying on GPS coordinates and your voice to find you. Copy, Warthog. We can hear your engines now, popping smoke in 30 seconds. The red smoke canister hissed to life somewhere in the fog-wrapped valley, its crimson plume rising like a prayer made visible. But in the thick gray air, Even smoke became meaningless, just another shade of gray in a world drained of color and definition. Viper descended through the fog at 500 feet per minute, her instrument panel glowing green in the cockpit darkness. The terrain warning system provided a constant electronic heartbeat, reminding her that the Hindu Kush Mountains reached up like fingers to snatch unwary aircraft from the sky. At 1,000 feet above ground level, she caught her first glimpse of the valley floor, shadows within shadows, the suggestion of terrain features rather than clear definition. The fog moved like something alive, swirling and shifting in patterns that created optical illusions and false horizons. Smoke is out, Warthog. We're the compound 50 meters northeast of the red smoke. I have the smoke, Viper replied, though the statement was more optimism than fact. She could see something red in the gray landscape below, but whether it was smoke, fire, or imagination remained unclear. Marking your position now. I'm going to make a low pass to identify targets. The A-10 descended through the fog like a hunting animal, its pilot's eyes scanning desperately for the visual references that would separate friend from foe. At 300 feet above the valley floor, she caught her first clear glimpse of the battlefield, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers against the stone ridgeline, tracer rounds drawing geometric patterns in the gray air. I have eyes on the target, she announced, her voice carrying the calm satisfaction of a predator sighting prey. Multiple muzzle flashes on the north ridgeline, approximately 200 meters from the red smoke. Beginning my attack run now. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was more than a weapon. It was an instrument of divine wrath, capable of delivering 30-pound bursts of depleted uranium at velocities that turned armor into vapor. When Viper squeezed the trigger, the sound was less noise than physical force, a metallic roar that seemed to tear the fabric of reality itself. The first burst walked across the ridgeline like the footsteps of an angry god, each impact throwing up geysers of rock and dust that painted the fog with darker shades. The muzzle flashes that had been harassing Trident 6 disappeared instantly, replaced by secondary explosions as ammunition stores detonated in sympathetic chains. Good hits, Warthog. Webb's voice carried genuine excitement for the first time in hours. The North Ridge is quiet. Can you work the eastern slope? We're taking fire from multiple positions along the terraces. Viper banked the A-10 hard left, feeling the aircraft respond with the heavy precision of a machine built for exactly this kind of work. The fog swirled around her wings as she lined up for another attack run, her targeting systems painting hostile positions with digital precision, despite the impossible visibility. The second gun run was longer and more deliberate, the GAU-8 cannon stitching a line of destruction across the eastern slope that silenced a dozen firing positions in less than 10 seconds. The sound of the cannon echoed off the valley walls like thunder, a mechanical symphony that spoke fluently in the language of applied violence. Eastern slope is clear, she announced, already turning for a third pass. How are you looking down there? Much better, Warthog. We're starting to get return fire under control. Can you hit the western positions? They've got us bracketed with mortars. Mortar fire was the infantry's artillery, indirect fire weapons that could drop explosives with devastating precision into areas that seemed safe from direct attack. If the enemy was using mortars, it meant they'd committed significant resources to eliminating Trident 6, resources that were about to learn the cost of threatening American warriors. The third gun run was surgical in its precision, each burst of cannon fire targeted at specific mortar positions that had been harassing the SEALs for hours. The depleted uranium rounds punched through stone and steel as if they were constructed from paper, turning fighting positions into craters and crew-served weapons into scrap metal. That's all of them, Warthog, Webb announced, his voice carrying the weary satisfaction of a professional who just watched the tables turn in his favor. The valley has gone quiet. We owe you a case of beer when we get back to base. Just doing my job, Trident 6. What's your status for extraction? We've got 2 walking wounded and 1 urgent surgical. If you could call in a medevac, we'd appreciate it. Viper checked her fuel gauge. Enough for another 20 minutes of station time, more than sufficient to provide cover for a medical evacuation helicopter. But first, she needed to climb out of the fog-wrapped valley and re-establish communications with base. Roger, Trident 6. I'm going to climb to altitude and coordinate your extraction. Stay tight, and I'll have a medevac bird inbound within 30 minutes. As the A-10 climbed through the fog layer into clear air, Viper allowed herself a moment of satisfaction that bordered on relief. 6 Navy SEALs were alive who shouldn't have been, saved by a combination of skill, determination, and the kind of aircraft that existed specifically to turn impossible odds into manageable problems. But the night wasn't over, and in Afghanistan, survival was often just the first challenge rather than the final solution. The medevac helicopter, a US-60 Black Hawk configured for medical evacuation, arrived at the Korangal Valley 47 minutes after Viper's gun runs had silenced the enemy positions. By then, the fog had begun to lift, revealing a landscape scarred by the precise violence of close air support operations conducted in impossible conditions. Viper orbited at 15,000 feet, her A-10 serving as an airborne guardian angel, while the Black Hawk descended into the valley to collect its precious cargo. From her altitude, she could see the aftermath of the engagement, craters where fighting positions had been, debris scattered across ridgelines, and the small compound where 6 warriors had held out against odds that should have overwhelmed them. Dustoff 73 to Warthog 17, the medevac pilot's voice crackled over the radio. We have all 6 personnel on board, including 1 urgent surgical. Thanks for clearing the neighborhood. We never took a shot. Roger, Dustoff, safe flight home. The Black Hawk climbed out of the valley and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying its cargo of wounded warriors towards surgical facilities that would repair what could be fixed and honor what couldn't be saved. For Viper, watching the helicopter depart felt like the completion of a promise she'd made to herself 3 years earlier, when her brother's coffin had arrived at Dover Air Force Base, wrapped in an American flag. The flight back to Bagram was routine by comparison: clear air, good visibility, and the kind of peaceful emptiness that made combat aviation feel almost meditative. But as she approached the airfield, Viper could see that something had changed during her absence. The ramp was crowded with personnel, more people than should have been awake at this hour, all of them watching the sky as if expecting something extraordinary. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting when she shut down the engines, his weathered face split by the kind of grin usually reserved for lottery winners and new fathers. Behind him stood Major Henderson, the squadron commander who'd authorized her emergency departure, along with what appeared to be half the base personnel. "How'd it go out there, Captain?" Rodriguez asked as she climbed down from the cockpit, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. 6 Navy SEALs are headed home instead of to the morgue, Viper replied, pulling off her helmet and running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. "I'd call that a successful mission." "Whole base has been monitoring the radio chatter," Henderson said, stepping forward with the kind of measured approval that suggested career-defining events were in motion. "What you did out there was—" He paused, searching for words that could encompass the magnitude of what had just occurred. "It was remarkable, Captain. Flying close air support in zero visibility conditions, in terrain that's claimed more aircraft than anywhere else in theater. The Navy is recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross." The Distinguished Flying Cross, the medal awarded for extraordinary achievement in aerial flight, reserved for actions that went beyond the call of duty and into the realm of the legendary. It was the kind of recognition that transformed careers and defined legacies, the military's way of acknowledging that some individuals rose above their circumstances to achieve something approaching the impossible. But for Viper, standing on the ramp with the smell of jet fuel and cordite still clinging to her flight suit. The medal meant less than the knowledge that 6 mothers wouldn't be receiving folded flags, 6 families wouldn't be planning funerals, and 6 warriors would live to fight another day. "I was just doing my job, sir," she said quietly, but even she could hear how inadequate the words sounded in the face of what had just occurred. "No, Captain," Henderson replied, his voice carrying the weight of 23 years in uniform. "What you did tonight was well beyond anyone's job description. You flew through conditions that should have killed you to save people you'd never met, in terrain that's defeated more experienced pilots than I can count. That's not duty, that's heroism." The word hung in the air between them like smoke, carrying implications that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Heroism was a dangerous concept in modern warfare, too often applied to situations that required tragedy to validate courage. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, the word fit perfectly, describing actions that transcended normal human limitations to achieve something approaching the mythical. As word of the rescue spread throughout the base, then throughout Theater Command, then eventually to the Pentagon itself, Captain Marlowe "Viper" Kessler found herself transformed from an underestimated pilot with a reputation for taking risks into something approaching legend. The story would grow in the telling. The female